Hey, Humo listeners, do you enjoy horror novels? Well, yours truly has written such a book. It is my literary debut, and it is entitled The Death of Fearful Strangers, an Adversary's Memoir. A summary of the plot. The Antichrist is born into flesh as mortal Donovan Walker during the remaining 40 years of humanity's rule on Earth. After his 30th year of life, he is awakened to his true identity and purpose. He discovers he can rely on his newfound powers to bring humanity to its knees and rule Earth as his kingdom. What he doesn't anticipate is that he is the savior the human race and its planet has awaited for millennia. The book is available as a Kindle on Amazon. You can read it for free if you have a membership with Kindle Unlimited. Warning: the content contains coarse language, extreme violence, graphic sexuality, and mature themes. It is not suitable for readers under the age of 18. The Death of Fearful Strangers by Morgan Rector. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, Morgan Rector here. I'm just dropping a line to say thank you to all of my Patreon donors. Since I'm not a Joe Rogan or Mark Maron, podcasting is more or less a starving artist gig for guys like me. Patreon donations keep me from having to take a job that would take away from my ability to generate more Human Monsters content. The website URL for Patreon is www.patreon, that's spelled patreon.com/leader, O-N-E, leader 1. A way to make a one-time donation is to send it through PayPal at Morgan Rector 331, Rector spelled R-E-C-T-O-R, at hotmail.com, morganrector331 at hotmail.com. You don't have to give a large amount of money if it isn't possible. If $1 a month or $1 one time is the best you can pony up, it would be gratefully accepted. I know how hard things are for everybody during COVID. Thank you for all the support you have given the show, whether it is through financial donations or simply by listening. I am grateful for all you have given to me and the program. Enjoy the show. I'm Morgan Rector, and welcome to the 4th season of Human Monsters. David Brant Berg was born February 18, 1919, in Oakland, California. He was a Christian and Missionary Alliance pastor. He worked as a pastor in Miami, Florida, Valley Farms, Arizona, and locations in Canada. His first controversy arose at the age of 32. He was asked to leave his church after he allegedly had an extramarital affair with a female member. Berg denied that this occurred. He said, "They simply threw me out, along with my little family and my pregnant wife. They just gave us a week's notice and told us to be out before the next Sunday when the new preacher would be there." He was employed as a teacher in Los Angeles for a couple of years in the early 1950s. For 12 years, he served as a booking agent for the television evangelist Fred Jordan. Berg commented on this time of his life. "Man, did I have a lot of sex drive at 40. Whew. I was out on the road chasing women most of the time. Out on the road by yourself for months on end. You learn what to do when you're lonely. Thank you, Lord. Like all the other lonesome men that we ministered to in the clubs, that's where I went." Following a period of unemployment, Berg's mother invited him to reach out to hippies in Huntington Beach, California. He found a group of people who needed a godlike leader to look up to and follow. His lust and perversion were baggage with which he was unwilling to part, and now that he had a following, he was able to create the Christian free sex religion of his dreams. Berg would tell his flock that a female spirit appeared to him out of thin air and had sex with him. Anybody familiar with demonic lore would tell you that if this occurred, he had fallen prey to the succubus. Her agenda is not to lead men down the path to a pious life, informed by a belief in God and a drive to emulate his only begotten Son. The succubus tempts men into further temptation until he gives his soul to Satan, consciously or not. There are no passages in the Holy Bible promising sexual encounters with promiscuous female angels as a reward for your faith and observances of Christian rites and directives. Operating in a similar fashion to the aforementioned demoness, Berg didn't place a high premium on consent. Karen Zerby once recalled an incident during the earliest years of her association with David Berg. One day, at the age of 17, she was hanging clothes on a clothesline outdoors when Berg came up to her and started touching her breasts. No permission, not even advance notification. He helped himself to any young woman who attracted his attention. She was shocked to find out that this deified holy figure was really just a dirty old man. When he was 50 years old, he left his wife Jane Miller, aka Mother Eve, and Karen Zerby replaced her. Berg had a child, his son, with a 17-year-old girl named Martha. Zerby would hang on his every word. He and the rest of his followers became convinced that the word of David Berg was the word of God himself. Berg believed that he should apply the lesson learned by the biblical figure Jeremiah to what was modern-day America at the time. According to Jeremiah's visions, Israel was doomed. Berg would send his followers dressed in the biblical garb of sackcloth, in keeping with the fashions with which Jeremiah himself was familiar. They proselytized to people in churches and other public places to warn the public of what they considered to be the imminent destruction that was sure to befall America. Berg began writing in earnest. The motif running as the most common thread throughout it all was sex. One such document was a pamphlet entitled "The Ready Folks." The cover presented an image of a group of men clad only in their underwear. They had erect penises and were smiling at some older women who looked like they were mortified. He wrote a pamphlet about communion, which was entitled "Come Union." There was a picture on the last page of an orgy that was underway. Berg was so effective at brainwashing his followers that they came to believe that his words were more important than those of the Holy Bible. He wasn't exactly a stickler for factual accuracy. He wrote that Jesus had sex with Mary, Martha, and possibly even with Mary Magdalene. As Berg put it, "I know he made love to Mary because I had a vision of it. I saw Mary making love to him in a vision. I had one right in the middle of a climax. Jesus and Mary were enjoying sex. He was so rugged and brown with such black curly hair and brown eyes, lying there flat on his back, with his arms over his head, and Mary was lying beside him, jerking him up. He was so dark, and she was so fair, a buxom, bosomy, blue-eyed blonde. Why should Jesus have been considered sinful to have enjoyed sex with Mary and Martha? Which he did, according to what I saw in my vision. I already told you that the Lord showed me that the Lord had sex with Mary and Martha, and probably Mary Magdalene, the harlot. Ever the predator, Berg molested and raped female children, starting with his granddaughters. This would not satisfy him for long. Davida, daughter of Karen Zerby, as a small child, was asked to interact sexually with Berg. He even wrote about it. "Come, Davida. Come, honey, you didn't get your lovin' this morning. Don't stick your knee on it, though. Honey, that's pretty hard for it. I love you. You gotta get up like this. I'll show you how the big girls do, see? They get up like this. Now is that good? Do you like that, huh? How's that, huh? Give you a little ride. Feels good. It's good exercise for me, too. You smell so good. So pretty and so sexy. Thank you, Lord. Hallelujah. What a family." David Berg's fantasies were being fulfilled. Davida performed fellatio on Berg when she was 7 years old. Sarah would wake her daughter up in the middle of the night so she could be raped by Berg. She would be in bed with them, Davida on one side of Berg, Sarah on the other, flanking and enabling him as he sexually abused a minor child. If Davida didn't comply, Sarah would reprimand her, which sometimes involved spanking. Berg put pressure on Sarah's husband, whose name was Reddy, to initiate a sexual relationship with his daughter. Berg would make the female minors available to visiting leaders and anybody else who was receptive to the gesture. Other girls that Berg molested on a regular basis were named Armandria, Bethy, and Christy. Davida left the family at a later age and worked as a stripper for a time. In 1969, Berg had a revelation, quote, that California would be hit by a major earthquake, end quote. Following this, he departed from Huntington Beach and took his followers with him when he took to the road. Throughout their travels, they proselytized on the streets and distributed pamphlets. Children of God leaders were referred to as the chain. As the children of God grew in numbers, they founded communes, though they were initially called colonies. Now they simply call them homes, as communes have attracted negative connotations over the years due to abusive cultic behavior that often occurs in parallel societies. David Berg typically communicated with his followers by writing letters, which functioned like press releases. He published almost 3,000 such missives over the span of 24 years. The communiques were called Mo letters, as Mo was one of his nicknames. In one significant message he issued in January 1972, he declared to his flock that he was God's prophet for the contemporary world. This was done to consolidate his ministerial authority over his following, and it worked. He would sometimes admit to his own failings in these letters as a way to reinforce common ground among the faithful, rather than risk being unrelatable. That same year, he wrote a Mo letter called "Flee as a Bird to Your Mountain." Though not stated explicitly, Children of God members interpreted the message as meaning they needed to flee the United States. Emigrate they did, spreading as far afield as Europe, Latin America, and East Asia. By the end of 1972, the organization had established 130 communities around the world. By the mid-1970s, it had set up colonies in approximately 70 countries. According to the BBC, there was an estimated 10,000 full-time Children of God members in the 70s. While the Children of God continued to extend their reach to the outside world in hopes of converting others, the isolation of Children of God life, combined with the adherents' reverence of its leader, developed a cult-like social dynamic. Critical thinking was taboo when it came to David Berg's pronouncements. Now that his congregation awaited every directive with unquestioning obedience, Berg would introduce new policies that would prove highly damaging to his flock, with no one unaffected, and that included the children. Indeed, the Children of God was renamed the Family of Love in February 1978. This step was taken as part of Berg's plan that he called the Reorganization Nationalization Revolution. Berg dismissed, quote, more than 300 leading members after hearing unspecified reports of serious misconduct and abuse of their positions, end quote. Guilty as they were also fall guys, as Berg would abuse his position in his own right for years to come. Sexual impropriety was baked into Berg's life from an early age, though his parents were equally pious, with both being preachers with the Christian and Missionary Alliance, and his maternal grandfather being a founding member of the Disciples of Christ movement. David would still become the recipient of inappropriate sexual attention at a very early age. In a pamphlet he published called My Childhood Sex, Doing What Comes Naturally, he wrote about the occasion when, as a toddler, his nanny was caught performing fellatio on him. As Berg recalled, I told you about my Mexican babysitter when I was 3. She used to suck me to sleep for my nap every afternoon. I loved it. I had orgasms and I really enjoyed it. This was not his sole effort to justify pedophilia. He also conveyed that were it not for the conservative and provincial religious perspective that was inculcated into him at an early age, he could have enjoyed a, quote, beautiful sexual relationship, end quote, between him and his mother. His attitudes regarding incest became so liberated that he regretted not having sex with his mother during their evangelistic road trips. As he put it, nothing sexual, however, sorry to say now. If I'd only known what I know now, I know we could have had a lot in common. She needed it. I needed it. But we were both too strict in our perverted religious thinking and misinterpretation of the Bible. Part of the doctrine that was developed in regards to sexuality by this self-appointed prophet was the so-called law of love. As stated by Berg, an adherent of the law of love can do just about anything in the sexual arena, provided that the participant is motivated by love. This meant that one could have sex with another person's spouse, more indicative of the family of love's descent into moral and spiritual decay. The law of love also permitted a Children of God member to have sex with children, as long as they stated that they raped or molested the child, including their own, out of love, they were off the hook. Taking this further, not only was having sex with someone other than one's spouse not perceived as adultery, but refusing to engage in the transaction would be seen as selfish, since the other person's entitlement, with its assumption etched in stone, was denied. In fact, when a married female member slept with another member's husband, it was perceived as a virtuous act. One member of the family of love made this statement clarifying their beliefs regarding the law of love. Many of us could not reconcile the established church's teaching regarding love and sex outside marriage with our experience of deeply caring and loving relationships outside of marriage, whether sexually fulfilled or not. How could such relationships be regarded as sinful and morally wrong? Could true, sacrificial, unselfish love really be contrary to the laws of God? The statement was entitled, "The Family Answers to Allegations of Sacred Prostitution." The family of love was functioning as a full-blown cult by this point. The members of the congregation had abandoned their capacity for rational thinking. They were willing to accept and enforce any new policy implemented by David Berg. He would claim to have gleaned his conception of sexual morality from the Holy Bible, even though any theologian would quickly have made short work of the veracity of his theories. Berg certainly practiced what he preached. He sexually abused both of his daughters and two of his granddaughters. His eldest daughter, Deborah, stated publicly in 1992 that she was abused by Berg. In fact, not only did he come on to her on several occasions, but he raped her repeatedly. To quote Deborah, "My father first pressured me to have sex with him when I was 8 years old in Texas. I resisted, but was raped nonetheless." She said it happened in 1953 when Berg was 34 years old. She also mentioned that during a membership meeting in London, England, he said that incest is a good thing. He proceeded to openly admit that he engaged in incest with Deborah and her younger sister, Faithy, from the time they were very young. Deborah, whose surname was later changed to Davis, published a memoir about her experience growing up in her father's cult, entitled "The Children of God, The Inside Story." In the book, she wrote in detail about the incest her father inflicted on her. This book was the first to publicly expose Berg as a pedophile. Faithy was so thoroughly brainwashed by her father that the very notion of age-appropriate sexuality was exotic to her. She assisted her father in his efforts to motivate family-of-love parents to manifest the incestual directives of the law of love doctrine and molest their children. She even once wrote a poem about her experiences being fondled and masturbated by her father. The piece was entitled "Faithy's Reaction to Childhood Sex." The poem directly addressed her father. It went as follows. "I like it. It reminded me of how you used to put me to sleep when I was a little girl, 3 or 4. Wow. Daddy did it best. Back rubbin', that is, and front rubbin' too. Daddy just made me feel good all over, and I didn't know why, but it would really put me to sleep with a sigh. Praise the Lord. I don't think it perverted me none at all, but it sure converted me to his call. So, I believe our parents should try it and help our kids get the natural habit. We pray it'll work, then Junior won't be a sexual jerk. It worked for me, as you can see. I just do what comes naturally. Oh, I could write a book, but this is just a look into my childhood sex." After the parents read the poem, Faithy would encourage them to do the same to their children. Somebody within the cult documented an incident whereupon David fondled Faithy's vagina with his big toe under a table. One former member posted this query on the internet. "Do you remember the description of DB at the table goosing with his foot Sarah Davidito and his own daughter Faithy? It was a sort of contest on who would climax first." In September 1993, Joanne Treadwell, Deborah Davis's oldest daughter, stated on ABC's American Journal that she was sexually abused frequently throughout her childhood by David Berg, her stepfather Bill Davis, and her mother. Mary Berg, another of David's granddaughters, reported being molested by David when she appeared on NBC's Now in September 1993. As she noted, in 1983, when she was 11 years old, she moved in with her grandfather. David began asking her to quote-unquote share with men. One such man was her stepfather, Angel, who was a leader in their public relations division. She reported that Berg sexually abused her, which included the deliberate and manual rupture of her hymen. The allegations were brought to court on many occasions, including in London, England, on October 19, 1995. This is a quote from a description of an event that was mentioned as part of the accusations. Berg and Maria came down to her bedroom, and whilst Maria and Sarah were talking, Berg got into her bed in their presence and fondled her. This happened on a number of occasions. He did rupture her hymen with his finger. They had oral sex. The abuse she suffered from her stepfather also came to light when it was mentioned that in Paris, when she was 7 years old, he forced her to masturbate him. A former member attempted to have their own memoir published without success, but the following incident that took place in December 1973 is quoted from the manuscript and describes David Berg's endeavor to rationalize and justify incest. Toward evening, about an hour or so before the children's bedtime, Jay asked us all to come and listen to a new Mo letter. A mattress was pulled down from upstairs and placed on the floor between us. We were asked to put all the children on the mattress as he began to read. They need to hear the new word of God also, he said. I listened to this letter, a long explanation of where incest was described in the Bible, how Lot did it with his daughters, how Mo did it with his babysitter. He bragged on and on about how he liked it and tried to have intercourse as early as 7 years old. He talked about how this was God's plan. Who else did the sons of Adam marry after the flood? He seemed to be saying that we all must begin to show the true love of God to our children in this way. Did I say seemed? He was saying it and saying that the system would deny children the fun of sexual play with their parents and other children and was damned by God. In 1980, David Berg and Karen Zerbe discussed incest further in a publication called The Devil Hates Sex. Berg was unvarnished, frustrated, and blunt in his appraisal of the practice of having sex with children. I don't know what the hell age has got to do with it. There's nothing in the world at all wrong with sex as long as it's practiced in love, whatever it is or whoever it's with, no matter who or what age or what relative or what manner. And you don't hardly dare even say these words in private. If the law ever got a hold of this, they'd try to string me up. They'd probably lynch me before I got to the jail. I'm talking about natural, normal, godly love as manifested in sex, as far as I'm concerned, for whomever. There are no relationship restrictions or age limitations in his law of love. There are no relationship restrictions or age limitations, as far as I'm concerned, for whomever. He didn't need to twist any arms among the followers to bring them on board with the law of love. Members began writing Berg letters about incest, seeking advice and opinions. One father named Sammy wrote to him about these matters. The following is their exchange, which was transcribed from the letters. Sammy, my little boy, 5 years old, is very sexy. He cannot even hug his mother without getting a hard-on. So I thought it was bad because it makes him too familiar with his mother if she takes care of him. I believe somebody else should take care of him, but until now, no one in the home has the burden to do this. What do you, Dad, think of this kind of mother and child relationship? Sammy, Europe. David Berg, what's wrong with it? It's perfectly natural. What better person to learn about sex from than his own dear mother? God's only law is love. Are you a jealous father? Sammy, no. As reports filtered into law enforcement agencies regarding the sexual abuse of minors in the cult, David Berg realized this was a time when the practice must be stopped. People who left the cult were speaking up, and some of them were childhood victims of sexual abuse perpetrated by adult members. In 1985, Berg issued an edict forbidding all sexual contact between adults and children under 14 years of age. It did not completely end the incest, however. Many fathers continued to have sex with their daughters if they were 15 years of age or older. Incestual relations within the family of love were not curbed until the 1986-1987 corridor. Amending the pedophilia policy, 1986 was the year when adults were forbidden from having sex with members who were under 18 years of age. This decreased the incidence of incest within the cult. The rules were more stringently enforced in 1987, when the community situated in the Philippines was accused of promoting incest. On April 1st of that year, the cult held a press conference to deny that any of their members participated in incest. Among the members on the panel were Faithy Berg, from a written statement. The accusation that we advocate incest is an absolute lie, cooked up by our enemies to try to besmirch and discredit our work for the Lord. We have never taught or practiced incest, and there is not one shred of evidence or piece of our literature to substantiate this fiendishly false charge. It's an outright lie, and these religious liars know it. The panel expressed their outrage and indignation with histrionic pathos, but their amplified theatrics did not convince anybody of their sincerity. Sexual abuse is a commonality among cults, and this was well known to law enforcement agencies. Perhaps realizing this, Karen Zerbe issued a top-secret burn-after-reading memo to every home occupied by a family that belonged to the cult. The document advised all adult members that sexual intercourse with anybody under the age of 18 was prohibited. Incest was also banned. Obedient as always, his followers obeyed the ruling. David Berg, on the other hand, addressed the faithful and asked them to lie about and deny the incestuous contact he made with his daughters. Only in a cult can you successfully apply the Orwellian brainwashing technique known as doublethink. They knew the truth. It would always reside inside their brains, rattling around like the marble in a spray paint can. The parents were advised by David Berg's very own junior sexual emissary, Faithy Berg, on how to molest their children, but they were prepared to think what Berg thought, say what Berg said, and do what Berg did. That's how a cult functions. In the brainwashed minds of the children of God, David Berg had been self-promoted from prophet to Godhead. They didn't just accept it, they believed it. This was their reality, and like most cult members, nobody could have convinced them otherwise. Their beliefs were so tightly wound, they were unlikely to ever unravel. Karen Zerbe's participation in pedophilia and incest was revealed in an exposé published by Rolling Stone magazine. According to the article, she engaged in pedophilia and pederasty with fervor and dedication. She even had sex with her son when he was 12 years old. The cult's literature encourages siblings to have sex with one another. Comics were often published to appeal to children on their level, and one comic depicts a teenage boy named Cain who is having sex with his younger sister, telling her she is gorgeous as he does so. In a panel beneath it, he says, smiling ear to ear, "Thank you, Jesus, for sex." To commemorate his 62nd birthday, David Berg posthumously published a memoir about the day and a pamphlet. One of the subtitles was Dido and Techie's Lovemaking Match. Dido and Techie are Karen Zerbe's children. Dido was having sex with Techie, his half-sister, on the floor. David Berg admonished Techie, saying, "Honey, you're supposed to do that in bed." Karen Zerbe's house was considered to be the least safe place for young children. The concept that incest was wrong was a foreign concept to her kids, thanks to Karen herself and the teachings of David Berg. Some former members commented on the incest that was widely practiced among the Family of Love cult members. Actually, I don't think incest was as rare as you may believe. I heard about it from a few girls. I think the most common type of incest, though, was brother-sister incest. I experienced this firsthand. When I was younger, 7 or 8 years old, my older brother began sexually abusing me. My half-sister was made to give our stepfather oral sex at age 10. She lost her virginity to him a couple of years later. My mother had sex with me when I was a little girl, and I just can't get past the fact that mothers are supposed to have maternal instincts. Why would you, and how could you, do such a thing to your own child? A man named Samuel was observed on numerous occasions fondling his daughters and other girls of comparable age. In an article, the Family News Encyclopedia, which was an internally published periodical, a teenage girl wrote in concerning her father. She was curious to know if it was right for her father to fondle her. She said she didn't mind having sex with unrelated adult males. She just didn't feel good about her father making advances on her. David Berg's reply: "According to your faith, be it unto you." An 8-year-old girl reported that her mother masturbated her when she took a shower. A girl who described her experiences online using the alias Cybercosmic described her abuse thusly: "My first memory is being watched by my stepdad while dancing with my 2 sisters and one other girl of 8, all of us half naked, only wearing see-through clothes. I was 3 or 4. I was encouraged to be sexual and enticing. Men would masturbate openly. There was incest, special fondling of children. Incest and child sex were commonplace, even amongst the younger children. From my memories of staying in close quarters, remember the triple bunk beds? I remember fooling around with several children, including girls, once even while my younger brother was in the room. I was about 5 or 6 at the time. When I was 7 or 8, I tried it with my brother. I don't know what pushed me to do it. It was encouraged to explore each other's sexuality, and I was curious. No one told me that doing it with your sibling is actually incestuous. Actually, my mom and stepdad knew about it and said nothing. My stepdad sexually abused my sister during her 8 to 12 years. That included the exchange of oral sex, but not rape, although there was penetration. My mother's reaction was, "But touching a child sweetly is not harmful." One woman noted that she had regular sexual contact with her 2 sons and her daughter. After she left the family of love, she feared her son would discover that she abused her daughter. Once, she returned home and found her older children sexually abusing her youngest child, who was less than a year old. This she could not abide. She admonished the children. One of her sons was indignant, arguing that organizational rules were not punitive when it came to sexual activities. Following this incident, she became suicidal. She also contemplated a murder-suicide, whereupon she would have killed her children and herself. Unable to live with the situation any longer and racked by remorse, she turned herself in to the authorities, confessing to the crime of incest. She underwent mental health treatment. Her children were removed from the cult and placed in foster homes and/or put up for adoption. A man who identified by the moniker Dead Dog told a story regarding his wife. "My first wife, which is still in the family, used to put our son to sleep by petting him and sucking on him. It really disgusted me, and I let her know that. Once she told me that I just needed to get over it, and this was acceptable and okay in the Lord's eyes. I'm still repulsed by that, and saw even then what a bunch of perverts DB was raising. I was in the group for almost 20 years. There's so many things I've seen and heard. I've tried to forget, but I feel that the Lord wants me to retain everything as a testimony against the lies and perversions to help others with the same problems. I remember my first wife, which is still deeply entrenched in the lies, in bed one night and allowing our son, which at the time was maybe 5 or 6, penetrate her just to see how it felt. Needless to say, he really liked it and would come back every so often for more. She would also at various times suck him, saying she liked his little penis in her mouth. I blame myself for allowing this and should have put my foot down at the time, but lacked the conviction, thinking I was just an old bottle thinking the way I did. This is a statement by someone who identified as Elkanah. He would initiate sexual contact between his little son, and his son's stepmother be placing him on top of her. Elkanah did not name the perpetrator of this offense. A user named I Swide Shut commented on the effects this sexual impropriety had on male members. Someone mentioned that it's rare for ex-member males to have the same qualms with their past as us females do, but I have met a fair few who are equally as fucked up as some of the most damaged females I know. I know one whose mother used to come home from fucking, and having not gotten off, she'd visit him in his bed nightly to finish the job. He's never going to get over that, and I doubt any woman will be able to handle the odd young man he had become, as sweet as he is. One user related a story they heard about Faithy Berg and her brother Hosea. In the early 90s, while in Dallas, Texas, my wife and I met a businessman who had helped the children of God with provisions in the early days. He said that he had seen Faithy and her brother Hosea engage in sexual activity. He also said that their father, David Berg, was watching them during the act. Occasionally, the cult's members were brought to justice for sexually abusing the children. One man who was stationed in France was sentenced to 19 years for sexually abusing his 3 daughters. His defense to the court was that he was teaching his daughters about sex, which he felt was a paternal duty. It was a perfect example of the degree to which the most faithful members had been brainwashed, a point that was noted by his attorney. The argument did not elicit sympathy from the court. The man's wife was sentenced to 3 to 4 years for her failure to report the abuse. A user using the alias Genti told this story about her experiences in Mexico. I was 12 years old and living in Mexico. There were bunches of uncles that just couldn't wait to get their hands on the little 12-year-old girls from the States. I ended up with the big, fat, ugly, creepy Mexican guy. At least they respected me enough when I cried my eyes out to not make me do it. Instead, I ended up with the shepherd of the home and his daughters in the same bed. 12 freaking years old. If there's anyone I'd like to bring to face the wrongs they've done, it would be those shepherds in Mexico. Not all members of the cult enjoyed the relations. One man confessed to having sex with his stepdaughter during his time in the family of love. He said he became consumed with self-loathing and felt remorseful until he became suicidal. Another man commented on the fact that he was so brainwashed he didn't see this sexual behavior as abnormal. At the time, I didn't think of it as abuse. I had no concept that normal people didn't do this sort of thing. I thought it was perfectly normal for parents to have sex with their children, and children to have sex with each other and with adults. Someone called VLG said that she was raped by her father at the age of 9 while her mother watched. After the fact, her mother ordered her to thank her father. The previous year, she was raped by her mother's paramour. VLG also said her mother had sex with her sons. To quote VLG, "I watched her make my little brother have intercourse with her. She said there were many sexual encounters between many of her siblings, and that she also had sexual encounters with her siblings." A woman writing under the alias X described the long-term effects the sexual abuse had on her. "All of my first sexual experiences were with fucking creepy, perverted adults, including my father. I spent 5 years feeling dirty and ashamed and confused and a whole list of other emotions that I don't know I could ever find adjectives for. That was my introduction to sex, and it was everywhere. My self-esteem and confidence and other attitudes in my life are very affected by the rapes and incest in my past. It's a struggle every day to not see myself as damaged, broken, or not whole. It affects the way I interact and react to people, and what I feel I can do in life. It gives me a lot of fear and insecurity. I find it almost impossible to trust. The list goes on. The story of David Dito. Karen Zerby immersed her son David Dito, who was born in 1975, heavily and irrevocably in the tawdry interpersonal dynamic of a cult. In one of the Children of God publications, an article called "The Story of David Dito" was published. The piece described sexual encounters that took place between David Dito and his nanny, Sarah David Dito. The articles evolved into chapters of a book, and it was written from 1975 to 1981, logging the many early childhood sexual experiences of David Dito. The finished compilation was comprised of 762 pages by January 1982. Some quotes from the book. David Dito, at 20 months old, gets quite excited when I wash his bottom and his penis, and his peenie gets real big and hard. I kiss it all over till he gets so excited he bursts into laughter and spreads his legs open for more. When playing on the floor, he'll oftentimes spread his legs open for me to kiss his penis, what we call his peenie. He got to where he liked it so much, he'd pull people by the hand down onto the floor and would spread his legs apart for the treatment. He pulled me down to kiss him, then pushed my head down to kiss some more. David Dito acts very anxious to take his nap nowadays. He'll eagerly get in bed and lie quietly under his sheet and play with his penis. I think lately he prefers that more than to have me do it for him. He'll sometimes just jump on top of me real quick, hunch away, and then jump off again and say, "Do you like that, Sarah?" But his usual more gentle and preferred approach is, "Let's go wash peenie," and then I know what he really wants. One can't delve into the sordid sexual history of the Children of God cult without mention of the practice called flirty fishing. Flirty fishing, described in the chapter entitled My Little Fish. Little Fish was David Dito's dubious honorific as one of the cult's favored targets of sexual impropriety. The so-called fish were male outsiders with whom the cult's women had sex. When the cult's women used their vaginas as traps to lure male outsiders into the fold, they would be literally lying on their backs with their legs spread open and saying, "Jesus loves you." It could be some dodgy character she met at a dive bar, but she did it in hopes that he would see the light and join the family. Berg ordered Karen Zerby directly to do as much flirty fishing as possible. He would say, "Fuck the daylights out of him. I as good as told you to go over there and grab his dick out of his pants and massage him. I told you to go over there and take his Peter out of his pants and do it right there." This directive was received through a document entitled "The Hooker, a Fisherman Instructs His Bait." There was even an illustration of a female flirty fisher sticking her hand inside a man's crotch. In preparation for the publication of the Book of David Dito, photographs were taken of the boy as sexual acts were performed on him. Before the book was printed, the photos were excised, since they were essentially producing child pornography. The pictures were shelved since they would surely act as the most damning evidence any investigator could discover. Included, however, were photos of David Dito with topless women. David Dito is naked and playing with women's breasts. Illustrations were drawn over the women's faces to protect their identities. After all this, the cult had the temerity to deny that such abuse took place. Despite the organization's declaration that the family of love, founded as it was in 1978, did not allow sex with minors, My Little Fish was published and distributed to all the cult's homes in August 1979. Even more damaging in court was the compilation document that followed in 1982. With many of the attempts to bring the cult to justice, one Judge Ward made this statement: "Berg was, in my judgment, quite clear, giving his approval to whatever was being written, and he was assuming responsibility for it. It is naive of the family to seek to distance the leadership from this book and cast the sole blame upon Sarah. In their original answer filed in this case, that is exactly what they sought to do. I have already sufficiently demonstrated that this attempt to lay all the blame on Sarah and none on the leadership is dishonest. It was self-evident that Berg approved of the sexual abuse to which Davidito was subjected. He indicated in the cult's literature that he was pleased about Karen Zerbe's sexual output, including her relations with Davidito. To quote Berg, "Dear Sarah, Davidito's foster mother, teacher, and lover is willing to do anything, whether it be to Davidito or to me or the fish, or the brothers or the sisters." Though not every adult in the organization sexually abused children, the practice became so deeply embedded in their way of life that those who indulged were completely free of scruples. In fact, it was looked upon the same way that consensual sex between adults is viewed in conventional society. Pedophilia and incest, while taboo in the rest of the world, were almost mundane in this cult. This point is illustrated in a statement made by a man named Aaron. He was born in 1972 and left the cult in 1988. His reflections: "I was encouraged to have sexual relationships with other children my own age when I was 6 to 8 years old. I would tell my mother that I want to make love to my girlfriend my age. My mom would say, 'That's great, go for it.' We got naked and we played around. My girlfriend's mother got undressed in front of me and asked me to come and play with her sexual organs. So I did. So did her son with her. He was the same age as I was." Aaron's first sexual contact with an adult was a woman he identified as V. He was 6 years old at the time. V's son, Jay, asked Aaron if he wanted to see what a vagina looked like. Aaron said yes. Jay informed his mother. Dutiful as always, V removed her clothes and sat on the toilet. She showed Aaron her vagina and asked him to play with it. He and Jay played with her vagina for some time. Aaron reflects some more on his sexual experiences in the cult. "I would have sex with many girls my age, and many adults would see us sharing and give a lot of encouragement. They would encourage me to share with all the girls my age. They would arrange for us to spend the night together. We had full intercourse. At times, everybody would walk around in the nude all day long. We kids were taught how to make sex more pleasurable. I had a couple of encounters with adults. I was masturbated by adult women in their 30s, suck their breasts, play with their vaginas." Aaron wasn't always eager to get with the program. Once, when he was 9 years old, the daughter of Jay and someone identified as K was offered up to him as a sexual prospect. She was 16 years old and he refused to participate. He even ran outside. His stepfather Paul laughed at this. Aaron did have sexual contact with an adult at the age of 10, who was identified as R. His stepfather asked him to have sex with his 12-year-old daughter. Aaron was also 12. Aaron comments on his adolescent sex life. "At age 12 to 14, my girlfriend was my stepfather's daughter, same age as me. I had full sex with her countless times, as often as we pleased. My best friend also slept with us and shared with her. He was the same age as us. This happened when I was 11, 12, 13 years old. There were times when the two of us would be sharing in the bedroom in the house, and he would walk in, see us. He would smile and would say, 'Are you having fun?' In 1986, when Aaron was 14 years old, he went to a gathering for youth called the Mexico TTC, or Teen Training Camp. Following this, he went to Brazil. He remained there until he left the cult at age 16 and a half. He recalled the events that transpired during this time. The sexual abuse was not only openly acknowledged and practiced, but it was tightly regimented, as he recalled. As soon as I got to Brazil, the first week I shared with adults. Aunt Nina, Sarah, I had scheduled sex relationships with them. Also shared with other kids my age and younger, as young as 10. At the teen home that I moved to, age 14 to 15, I shared with all 3 adult women there and all other teen girls. Also with 3 preteens under 12. The youngest was 10 or 11. Everybody was doing this. I was just one of the people on the sharing schedule. You were scheduled with both adults and teens and preteens. Some of the teen girls would masturbate the little children, ages 4 to 8, perform oral sex on them, including their own brothers. On a number of occasions, I walked into a room and saw Sikh and servants, older daughter, E and F and M, and other teen girls masturbating and performing oral sex on Sikh and servants' boys. E was sharing with her little brother. I shared with Sikh when she was 8 months pregnant. It was on the sharing schedule. She asked me how I would feel about it, and I said it would be fine. Sikh shared with all other teen boys in the home. She was the shepherdess. She had 2 husbands, Secundus or servant, and Aaron. When I would be in another home, I would share with teen girls and adults there. I was sent to a new teen home. Here, all inner doors, including the bathroom doors, were taken out. The sharing schedule was raging. Adults were sharing with children all the time. At the age of 15, Aaron was penalized for refusing to have sex with Sikh's daughter, who was 12 years old. Sikh forced his hand. He recalled an occasion when Sikh had a man named Dave watch as one of her 2 husbands shaved her vagina. At times, the cult houses were veritable nudist colonies. As noted earlier, Aaron and any other member faced consequences for refusing to engage in sexual activity with children when prompted to do so. As one former member put it, David Berg enforced sexual relations with children. If you didn't do it, you were just lucky you didn't get caught. If you didn't want to do it, you got in trouble. Pretty simple, I'd say. One former member using the alias Broken Body Strong Spirit has had enough of people hectoring her to recover from her experiences with sexual abuse in the cult at their convenience. Until you have been an 8-year-old with a grown man's hand up in her cunt every night because he shares a room with you? Until you have been a 10-year-old who was raped by a host of quote-unquote loving uncles? Until you have been an 11-year-old that was sent by your loving shepherds out with a fish that tried to rape you? Until you have been an 11-year-old who was forced to suck her stepfather's cock or put on a sharing schedule when you were 12? And until you have been told by your loving shepherds that everything that happened to you was not abuse, and that if you were not so prudish and unrevolutionary, you would be able to admit that you actually enjoyed what happened to you, then you have no right to tell anyone to just get over the past. One woman identifying as Celeste Jones noted that she was shipped to a commune stationed in Greece. She was sent without her parents. This was a common practice. Many children were separated from their parents. In some cases, they didn't see them for years. It also didn't help that their passports were confiscated by the leadership. It was entrapment. Jones reflected on her time living in the cult's commune in India. In India in particular, the adults would often have orgies and the children would watch. Later, when I was still only 5, 6, or 7, there was fondling with men, and I was expected to perform fellatio. At 5, we were paired off with boys and expected to explore sexuality. But it went beyond that. Berg would say this was children exploring their own sexuality, but it wasn't. There was a time when I was scheduled to visit one tent on a certain night, then another on a different night, and I wasn't alone. It was grotesque exploitation of children. At 5, I was forced to have play sex with boys my own age. The other men would ask me to touch them sexually. Many of them forced me to perform oral sex on them. I was never actually raped, but a lot of my friends were forced to have intercourse with older men. Once, when I complained to one of the women looking after me that I didn't want to go with the commune leader, she told me to pray and sent me back to him. By the time I was 9, I was having full sex with boys around my age about twice a week. If I said I didn't want to, I'd be punished by being given extra chores or stopped from seeing my friends. Not all parents were completely on board with the idea of submitting their children to be used for the sexual gratification of adults. As Ava St. John remarked, there was definitely a real confusion I would go into when a woman would go to bed with my 5-year-old son, and I would pace up and down outside, biting my nails, going, "I'm supposed to allow this. This is a good thing. He will grow up with no issues around sex, blah, blah, blah." Even the children would ask, "Auntie so-and-so, can I make love to you?" The most horrific thing that horrified me the most was when a baby was taken to hospital and diagnosed with gonorrhea. That was a real shock to me, and that really freaked me out. Eyes Wide Shut was very blunt about the physical damage that was done to many prepubescent girls. I know for a fact that lots of girls were actually hurt, raped, bloodied, and ruined. I was sexually abused 2 major times before the age of 9. In case you're wondering what motivated the men to do said damage, Frank offers some clarity. Who abused young girls? All of us did. Why? Because that is how we were taught. We were taught to be sexual, to think that God is a sexy God and that it's okay to have sex with young children. Ian Albitz commented on a conversation he had with a prominent member of the organization's leadership. I had a conversation with a man who was, at that time, one of the national leaders for the family in the U.S. This was almost 4 years ago. I don't remember what his title was. CRO, NRO, it doesn't really matter. In his exact words, children and adults having sex is okay in the sight of God. The only reason we stopped is because he was causing us so much bad publicity. David Berg encouraged the children to have sex with one another. A quote on this matter from a document entitled "Children of the Future." "You ought to see them get it on. They really do all right, God bless them. They're learning, and it takes a little while. I think the Lord gave these few years before puberty and actually having children for a little practice and a little experience and getting a little start. The leadership was a little less cavalier in their attitudes regarding sex among teenagers, since pregnancy was likely to occur, and it would attract even more negative attention from law enforcement and the media. The public perception of cults was tainted considerably after the Jonestown tragedy in Guyana. Realizing his own cult would likely be equally scrutinized and condemned, Berg advised his followers to go underground. One idea was for all members to return to their countries of origin. That, or they could settle down in the mission field while keeping to themselves. They could get jobs and live lives of semi-normalcy until the negative publicity petered out and the public lost interest. Many did return to their homeland and obtained conventional employment. Others stayed in the field, but still got jobs working among outsiders. They were still determined to build their numbers, and they began the practice of door-to-door witnessing as opposed to passing out literature and occupying public spaces. The flirty fishing wasn't eliminated entirely. Some of the organization's women worked as escorts. Indeed, by the 1987-1988 corridor, the Children of God had become a massive brothel, perhaps the biggest in the world. The family kept track, and according to their statistics, 250,000 outsiders had been serviced sexually by family women by that point. The flirty fishing free-for-all ended in 1987 when a female family member died of AIDS-induced pneumonia. David Berg introduced what he called the condom revolution. They could still have sex indiscriminately with outsiders. They just had to use prophylactics. Venereal diseases were not the only consequences of the family's own brand of promiscuity. Many children were conceived through flirty fishing and other forms of the free sex, and many of them don't know who their fathers are. Other health-related repercussions were suffered by the flirty fishermen and women, however. Someone using the handle HEC provided details. Everyone had this urinary tract infection. Can't remember now what it was called, and we were living on antibiotics and getting yeast infections from them. One of the biggest flirty fishers I personally knew died of cervical cancer. Another poor girl I know personally ended up with such bad STDs, coupled with the fact that Berg's son, wouldn't let her go to the doctor, that she ended up with her womb having scar tissues and not being able to have children. It was devastating to her. In case you were wondering if the practice of flirty fishing was phased out, one online user known as Been There Done That said, "Don't tell anyone that flirty fishing is a thing of the past. I know from personal experience that it goes on." Some of the things that flirty fishers were expected to do were demeaning and torturous. To quote a user using the alias Sheriff, "It was all over the East. It was very, very common in Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, Thailand, all over. A lot of homes became very dependent on it. I have talked to other women who told of horrors, things they were forced to do by leaders to keep the money coming. I know women who said they were forced to do things that they did not want to do. According to a similar source, the fishers were often forced to engage in anal sex, despite their protests. To quote someone using the handle Curious, Berg said to one of the women in his fold, "Your best talent is your pussy." Venereal disease became a serious problem within the family. To quote a user named Dalva Lynch, after a virtual epidemic of incurable herpes, various homes for herpes carriers were founded so that the illness wouldn't spread any further. Though the cult's public face was rechristened with a new name, that being the Family of Love, and later the Family International, former insiders and some well-informed outsiders have been quick to point out that it is, and always have been, the Children of God cult. Judge Ward commented on this. There has been much semantic posturing, much muddying of the waters, and much waste of time over the issue of whether or not the Children of God still exists. These diversionary tactics were deployed to obfuscate the real issue, which is whether or not the current leadership are responsible for what happened during the period up to the RNR. I am totally satisfied that there was a continuous line of top leadership with David Berg and Maria at the helm, regulating the affairs of the group, which despite changes of name and shape, remained one and the same. The Mo letters relevant in the early days of the Children of God remained as relevant after the RNR as they continue to be relevant today. The name may have been changed. Various echelons of the leadership chain may have altered. But the command remained with Berg, Maria, and his inner cabinet. I find that it was a disingenuous attempt to distance them from their responsibility both for what is and for what was. More on sharing. Orgies were held frequently among the family's faithful. Every marriage was polyamorous, and at these fuckfests, nobody was left behind. After all, the law of love was instituted to ensure that all the adults' sexual needs were fulfilled. As Berg wrote, "No permission needed for sex. No servants, leaders need to be consulted. Fire away. Praise God. Pregnancies from sex or flirty fishing need no longer be considered as obligations to marry as before. Some have not felt free to help each other for fear it might require marriage if pregnancy occurs. That's optional." The orgies were well attended in the early 80s. They were called National Area Fellowship Meetings. They would often rent a large banquet hall for this purpose. Sex schedules were posted on the walls, indicating to attendees who their sex partners would be. Eventually, due to venereal disease, the sex was restricted to members of the same commune. This rule was abolished in 1995. The cult decided to place age restrictions on sex partners. If one member was 18 years old, they would only be able to have sex with someone who was 7 years older, though eventually this policy was eliminated. In the late 90s, the members decided they couldn't accept the sexual inhibitions any longer. They felt there wasn't nearly enough free sex going on, and they were vocal about it. Ultimately, the children of God would return to their perverted ways. One online user going by the moniker of FG described a scenario that transpired in the East. I remembered living in the East, where all the adults in a huge home would have sex in the swimming pools. Then families with little children would swim in them, and the kids would get herpes sores on their eyes and their armpits. You'd get sperm in your hair, too. The kids kept getting sick with all kinds of infections and sores. Though the Holy Bible takes an anti-homosexuality stance, David Berg allowed it in his cult, insisting that sex and love are the true ways of God, even if that meant implementing a policy in direct violation of the pronouncements of the book of Leviticus. Sexual abuse wasn't the only form of torture endured by the children of God's children. At so-called Victor camps, any recalcitrant minor was subjected to a battery of physical and psychological abuse for any kind of behavior that was deemed transgressive by the cult. The abuse was administered until their behavior was corrected, hence the victory. The children of God put their PR spin on this practice with this statement. A prototype for these camps was the Macau Detention Center. The children of God tried to present the Macau camp as a voluntary program on a farm in rural surroundings for individualized guidance and encouragement of teens in a small personal family atmosphere with lots of love and prayer and a consistent daily schedule of typical boarding school type discipline, administered with patience, prayer, reasoning, and understanding. Judge Ward could smell the bullshit from a mile away. He referred to the preceding statement as propaganda. His response: having heard from and seen a number of the teenagers who were at Macau, I am in no doubt at all that it was a travesty of the truth thus to describe that program. The truth is that the children were subjected to a regime of physical and psychological brutality. Paddlings were a regular feature of life in the camp. The children were systematically beaten in it. In his address to the court, Judge Ward described an incident when one girl collapsed in the middle of her paddling. The adults held her up as a human dartboard so that the others could hit her more. This went on until she was half unconscious. She was dragged to her room afterwards. These youths were forced into indentured servitude. They worked 7 days a week doing construction. They broke up cement or old sidewalks. When these options were not available, they did other menial work. They were not allowed to talk as they did so. If they had doubts about or criticisms of the leadership, they were required to write confessions of their disloyalty. They would receive a severe beating after doing so. In the case that went to court in England, a former member named Esther testified about the relevant literature and the interview she held with the children of God's youth. This was a statement from her testimony. I was the secretary who interviewed child after child about Victor camps, and during that time suffered from hair falling out of my head and serious problems with my nerves, because I understood we had wreaked Nazi concentration camp tactics on our young people. After hearing all their testimonies, I am ashamed and still cry over it when I think about these bleeding hearts. She adds, it did really impact me personally. For instance, I developed a terrible nervous retching every time I would become upset, and my hair was falling out if I even shook my head slightly. It was pretty scary. I was horrified at the testimonies I heard about Victor programs. The horrors were unveiled before me in story after story, and experience after experience. I could no longer deny the awful truth that this was no place for families and children growing up in the environment would be scarred and have big issues to deal with. Every youth who attended the camp had their personal belongings confiscated. The punishments were constant, severe, and could be provoked for the pettiest of reasons. Beatings were often carried out in public. They were forced to wear the kind of clothing that would humiliate them, though the nature of which was not disclosed. They would be deprived of food and sleep. When they attended to the slave labor, they were not given gloves, with the result that their hands would become bloody and swollen. Their silence restrictions could be lengthy, with them forbidden to speak to anybody except with the consent of their leader. Under this circumstance, they were forced to wear signs around their neck that read, "Don't talk to me, I am on silence restriction." For an overzealous touch, their mouths would be taped over, or they were made to wear surgical masks. They were often locked in small attics or rooms for days, weeks, or even longer. Esther noted that the representative of one such group who testified got a tongue lashing from the judge. He was so outraged he could no longer keep his composure. She posted the following online. The family almost lost the BI court case when the judge found out about the Victor camps. He was horrifically infuriated by Victor camps, and the subsequent stories he heard from young people who sat on the witness stand, one after the other, made him even more angry. Some online postings further fleshed out the harsh realities of being stationed at a Victor camp. A woman posting as Anna reflected on her experience. I remember of the times that I was in the family and the horrible things that happened to me, like make me swallow 2 tablespoons of chili pepper as a punishment. Horrible spankings were becoming an everyday activity. Scrubbing our tongue with soap and a cloth brush. These are only some of the light punishments that we had. A parent who was once a member said her son, at 7 years of age, was once beaten across his face until it was swollen. He was black and blue for days. This same person recalled what a man named Patrick McClure, aka Peter Piper, did to one child. He made a poor 15-year-old child dig rocks up to 14 hours a day and put the rocks back in the hole and keep repeating it, and hung a sign around her neck for 6 months. No one was allowed to talk to her. She tried to kill herself by drinking bleach, and Patrick McClure beat her and did not take her to the hospital. She said it was one of the worst times in the family for her. A similar story was told by a woman using the moniker Karen. You were sent out to this field, and it was about, I would say, 50% sand and 50% rock, and you were meant to remove all the rock from it, which could take a lifetime, and you could never do it. And they wouldn't allow you to have gloves, and they would put you out there early in the morning till late at night. Just like how there were no age restrictions when it came to sex in the children of God, the same policy applied when it came to the physical torture of children, as a woman using the handle Aaron noted. I saw the marks on babies as young as 9 months old. One of them was my brother. I saw them inflicted. I remember practically breaking down a door to get to my little brother who was being beaten by her mother's husband. I got into the room, stood between my 10-year-old brother and this man, and said, "If you come near him, I'll kill you." I did save him from further abuse that night. Unfortunately, he later suffered such severe abuse from the same man after I left. He has 2 nearly 12-inch long scars down his back. It's not necessary to exaggerate such horror. Scars speak for themselves. Eventually, all this became too much for some members to bear. as Ava St. John recalled. I spent much of my time in TF being publicly torn to shreds and scapegoated, and getting punishments such as ostracism, isolation, fasting, confession sessions, exorcisms, being repeatedly raped, fucked by leaders against my will, Victor programs, etc., etc. The last straw was when my son was belted across a room by my shepherd, causing my son's head and face to become swollen, and I was not permitted to take him to get checked by a doctor. Even though I was already being silenced and on a Victor's program, I was in a fury and wrote a long letter of protest to the higher-ups, something virtually unheard of in TF at the time, saying that this was totally unacceptable. They summarily excommunicated me for the crime of being an incorrigible, independent thinker, and literally put me out on the street penniless, with a new baby and 2 little children, knowing no one, and with no place to go. Someone identifying as JP began to crack under the pressure and trauma. After being made to walk around with a large diaper tied around their mouth and a sign on their torso, they became suicidal. Seeking the mercy of death, they opened a bottle of Ajax cleanser and ate a substantial amount. It did not bring them to the mercy of death. The torments to which the children were subjected rivaled some of the tortures meted out to prisoners of concentration camps. As someone using the handle Jules recalled, the horrific reality is that this level of brutality did occur. I saw a 2-year-old boy held upside down naked and beaten with a guitar wire by his father. A father plunged his 12-year-old son's hand into boiling water. Not a blind child related a horrific incident in another camp. There was a man named Bernabe in Argentina. He was an abuser of the first kind. He threw his 2-year-old daughter against the wall, breaking both her legs and her pelvis. She spent months in an A-frame cast. His son, an infant, was taken to the hospital with breathing complications resulting from his being held over a pot of steaming water. The long arm of the law. In the early 1970s, a group of parents formed an organization called FreeCog. The leader of the group was Bill Rumber. His daughter joined the Children of God. Later iterations of the group were the Citizens Freedom Foundation and then the Cult Awareness Network, or CAN. It was during this time that radical deprogrammers like Ted Patrick would kidnap cult members. It was only by taking this drastic measure that any possibility could exist of reversing the brainwashing that served cult members up to the abuse to which many of them were subjected. Some deprogrammers operated at the top levels of government. In Mexico in 1978, the First Lady obtained some flirty phishing pamphlets. She was shocked and outraged by the material. She called for an investigation of the Children of God, and several of its compounds were raided. 40 men, women, and children were rounded up and put in prison. The adults were charged with prostitution and corruption of public morals. After spending 2 months in prison, they were deported back to the United States. At about the same time as the Johnstown tragedy, Children of God members were discovered by law enforcement in Malta. When one of them was detained, they confessed to past involvement in the organization, but lied when asked if they were presently involved. That member, along with all others, were explicitly instructed by David Berg to deny that they were affiliated with the Children of God, as noted in the following statement. If they suspect or have any proof that you are members, you can tell them you no longer belong to that outfit at all. In fact, we don't, because the R&R changed the name, everything. You can say there was an absolute split, and you have nothing to do with those people anymore, so that's your story and don't forget it. It's very important in case they nail you. Berg justified his practice of lying with the following statement. I have deceived, or I have said something that I knew they would believe. I meant one thing when I really meant another. deliberately, deceivers, yet true. This is exactly what the cogs do. You may have to lead people to believe that something is a certain way when it's really not that way. Berg and his sheep were desperate to cleanse their wool of any kind of incriminating material that would prove that they were a cult, specifically one that abused children. In Malta, they dumped their literature in dumpsters throughout the city to prevent it from passing into the hands of police. The Children of God and Berg were receiving a great deal of negative media focus in Europe's urban centers at this time. In Greece, Orthodox priests publicly condemned the cult. The governments and their police agencies in Asia began to crack down, and legions of Children of God members were arrested. Most of them were deported. Some of them were still so irrevocably brainwashed they condemned the authorities, religious and otherwise, that chastised them and turfed them out of their properties. Though the cult's official position on adult sex with minors, when questioned by outsiders, was that they put a stop to the practice, David Berg continued to engage in these offenses into the 1990s and forward to the day of his death. In fact, there is no evidence that David Berg ever renounced any of his beliefs. He was the opposite of a paper tiger. The well-intentioned malice he wreaked upon underage girls as a sexual predator was concealed behind semantics and propaganda. 1992 was a hard year for the Children of God, and deservedly so. Two men named Ed Praby and Daniel Welsh infiltrated the cult in hopes of acquiring incriminating materials and witnessing criminal behavior. Their time and effort did not go to waste. They accumulated a large trove of literature and videos. In many of the recruiting videos, prepubescent girls were observed performing stripteases. Clips of the videos that didn't register as child pornography were sent to television networks and were broadcasted around the world. They were also viewed in court. The images were so appalling to those who viewed them that governments around the planet enacted new legislation to prevent the type of abuse that occurs in cults. Russia even went as far as to ban humanitarian efforts if the activists were affiliated with religious institutions. The Phoenix family. Among the most well-known former members of the Children of God are actors River Phoenix and his brother Joaquin Phoenix. They were children of a hippie family that moved frequently across the United States. River and Joaquin received no schooling. In 1973, their family joined the Children of God and lived in Caracas, Venezuela. They were to work as missionaries and fruit pickers. In an interview with Details magazine, River said he lost his virginity when he was 4 years old, but did not remember the incident. The female was an adult. He was generally reluctant to discuss Children of God. He said to a journalist interviewing him for Esquire magazine in 1994, "They're disgusting. They're ruining people's lives." In 1979, David Berg's health was in decline. He began drinking alcohol heavily. His favorite drink was sherry. He nearly drank himself to death. Deceptive as always, he claimed he was drinking the sherry to rid himself of an infection in his throat. He believed he contracted the infection when performing cunnilingus on one of his followers. It was not an unreasonable assumption, considering that by that point, the Children of God was a petri dish of sexually transmitted disease. He wrote about it, publicly humiliating a woman named Deborah when he named her. Some say he was an alcoholic before 1979. David Berg died on October 1st, 1994, in Costa da Caparica, Portugal, at the age of 75. This flew in the face of his prediction that he would die in 1989. He also predicted that Jesus would return in 1993. No matter how you slice it, he was full of shit. And given the manhunt launched by law enforcement agencies to bring him before the courts, he was likely sweating it out of his pores. It was likely his natural reaction to the numerous court cases that were underway. While some Children of God members were brought to justice and facing several years in prison as sex offenders, David Berg went on the lam. Living as a full-time fugitive, he traveled with a falsified passport. He had phony passports for Canada and Australia. Names for himself and other members were taken from the gravestones of French Canadians. Despite his death and his incompetence as a clairvoyant, many of his followers refused to accept reality. This was reinforced when he died. They received the following message and took it as gospel. Those who spoke evil of him, who spoke evil of this dignitary, would be brought low, that it may be known that no man spake as this man did. Have I not said in prophecy for many millenniums that I shall raise up one shepherd, and there shall be one shepherd of one fold, even my servant David? He is the one David of the end. Behold, this is my servant David, whom I have called down out of the ages. This is my prophet David. David Brant Berg is he whom I have called down from the lineage of the ages. What nonsense. Modern day. The Children of God changed its name to the Family in 1995, which remained its moniker until 2003. In the 1994-1995 court case in England, Lord Justice Alan Ward ruled that the organization, including much of its leadership, were guilty of abusing children with sexual impropriety, harsh corporal punishment, and sequestration. He saw evidence in 1995 that proved that the family's compounds were safe places for children. The group was permitted to operate as a religious institution with the proviso that it ceases all corporal punishment of children in the United Kingdom. They were also required to denounce all of David Berg's writings that advocated for and encouraged the sexual abuse of the group's children. In 2004, the Children of God changed their official name yet again, this time to the Family International. Their official website is www.thefamilyinternational.org. From outward appearances, it comes across as a typical Christian missionary sect. This is a clip from an interview with David Berg.
The Ten Commandments were done away with by the law of Jesus Christ, the law of love. God now only has one law, the law of love, to love God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. He said, Jesus himself said, the Son of God, in this law, he said, dwelleth all the law and all the prophets. All fulfilled in this one law. Just this one law of love fulfills all 10 and all the rest put together. So we don't need them anymore. We're no longer under the laws of Moses. We're no longer under the 10 Commandments. We're no longer under all that religious folderol and rigmarole and form and ceremony and temple worship. All you have to worship God today is your own heart. And you can carry this temple, which is the temple of His Holy Spirit. God's Word says so. This is the temple of His Holy Spirit today. And this is where you must worship Him. Within the temple, the holy heart, in the temple of your heart, into which Jesus said, I will come in if you just open the door. Open the door of your heart. Make your body my temple and I'll come in. This is the temple of God today. And this is where He dwells today, and His only law is love for Jesus. To love the Lord with all thy heart and thy neighbor as thyself. That is the only religion that counts, is to have the love of God in your heart.
This is from an appearance by former member Christina Babin on Megyn Kelly Today.
She was raised in the infamous Children of God cult, now known as the Family International. She says she left when she was 21 and is just now opening up about what happened to her. Watch this.
My mother joined when I was a baby.
Christina Babin grew up in the religious cult Children of God, created by David Berg in 1968.
And they love bombed her and sang her songs and told her they were going to change the world and give her and her kids a meaningful, purposeful life. And so she joined. And that's how my story began.
For Jesus!
On the surface, Children of God members practiced Christian beliefs and communal living.
Daily life was very strict, very structured. So you woke up, you prayed, you did indoctrination, and then you went out on the street and begged for money and food. There was not very much time for school. Most of us don't have more than a 6th grade education. I have less personally. They believed in Jesus and salvation and witnessing and evangelizing the world.
But according to Christina, that all eventually changed.
We were trafficked across the world, from country to country, from commune to commune. We were moved constantly. They held our passports, and I never knew where my parents were. Most of the time, they didn't know where I was. I know that I lived in at least 40 different places.
In 1976, David Berg introduced flirty fishing, which encouraged female members to show God's love through sexual relationships with potential converts. As for young girls like Christina, she says they were encouraged to engage in what Berg called sexual sharing.
Father David had sent out a letter to everybody and said that children should be shown how to have sex. And an adult couple came and got me in the night and showed me how to have sex. And I knew, by that time, I already knew that women were supposed to be prostitutes and we weren't supposed to say no to sex, and that sex was part of our life. So I knew mentally what was expected of me and what I was supposed to feel. But when it happened, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. And I thought there was something wrong with me.
Joining me now, Christina Babin. Christina, welcome.
Thank you.
I know this is the first time you've spoken out publicly on television about this, so I appreciate you being here. You were basically raised in this cult. I mean, from age 1, when your mom joined and brought you into it, right?
Yes, this is all I've known.
That's right. So do you remember the first age where it dawned on you what's happening here is not normal?
Honestly, I always had this sick feeling in my stomach. It never felt right. It was more the absence of feeling what was normal.
Mm-hmm. The group starts off as this sort of, we're all about God and Jesus and we love people. And then it morphed into this sick sex cult. I understand the authorities out of New York in 1974 or so actually looked into the group. Were you born yet?
I was born in 1974.
Okay. And decided there was nothing they could do because it was a religious organization.
Yes.
How is it that the authorities seem to have failed you time after time after time in shutting this thing down?
The excuse that we're given by the FBI, and they have many files, there's all kinds of evidence all over the internet. The Library of Santa Barbara has an entire collection of the cult's doctrine and teachings. But we're told because the crimes were committed overseas that they are untouchable. We're also told that the statute of limitations is expired. So I'm not...
On child rape?
Yes. It's shocking. But now there's a few reasons that it gets complicated. We were trafficked. We were moved constantly. We were never taught anybody's names. So it's very difficult to learn your abuser's names. And
You think that was by design?
Oh, absolutely. And we were told it was for security reasons. So we never shared our personal names with anybody. So nobody knew our names either.
So you are open about the fact that you were forced into sexual relationships starting at what age?
At age 11.
Did your mother know about that?
No, she didn't. Usually it was done by other people that were not your parents, but you gave your children to the cult. So the cult raised you as a collective. Everybody was your parent. So most parents didn't participate, some did, but the thing that is very interesting is that at 11, I had already been taught that women were sexual objects, that we were supposed to be God's whores. So it was not that shocking to me that they took me aside and said, here, we're going to teach you how to have sex because this is part of your training. What surprised me was that I didn't like it. And I thought there was something wrong with me, that something was wrong with my heart, my soul, because I didn't enjoy the thing that David Berg said that I should.
Wow. Of course, you were not alone. This was happening to many children inside the cult, and it would have devastating consequences for many of them. We'll pick it up there right after the break. And we're back now with Christina Babin, a former member of the Children of God cult who managed to escape. And this cult still exists in today. It's an online group now. We'll get to that, but it's not gone. So the sexual abuse that was characteristic of this cult. That was something virtually everybody experienced in your memory?
Everybody of the first wave of children. We all experienced I almost want to call it spiritual abuse, teaching women that they are sexual object, that sex is the most important thing, that sex is how you portray love, and that love should be given to everyone. Most of the actual physical sexual abuse happened to us older kids.
Mm-hmm. And David Berg, the head of the group, pushed incest as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I know you say, thankfully, you were not subjected to that, but as you were, I mean, it's rape, as you were raped by fully grown men inside the cult. Did you sense any remorse on their part? Was there any shame attached to it on their end?
The first time, actually, yes. And it was a terrible moment, but it was also a beautiful moment for me to get a glimpse into how much control the cult had over people and how I wasn't the only one. I overheard the man talking to the woman, and
his wife?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
As far as I know. He said, "That was so wrong. I will never do that again." And he said it with conviction. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'm not the only one that feels this. I'm not the only one that thinks that. After that, I wasn't quite as lucky. But it is important to mention that most of these people were brainwashed. They were controlled. If they rebelled, they could possibly lose their children and never see them again. So this cult was about control. Mm-hmm. And controlling somebody's sexuality is one of the best ways to control somebody. Sexual abuse is always about power. It's not about lust. Mm-hmm. So you control somebody's sexuality, you control the most intimate part of their soul. And then after that, you can ask them to do all kinds of things.
And it instills shame in the children, and in this case, for this man, in the perpetrator as well. I know that the suicide rate for the children in the cult is incredibly high.
It is extremely high.
And that's no accident. One of David's so-called sons, an adopted son, who he called Davidito. He wound up leaving the cult, and as an adult, stabbing his nanny to death, who had participated in his abuse.
She had sexually molested him, yes.
And then killing himself. I mean, there are lifelong consequences to this, and we'll get in a minute to how you managed to get out. But how did they make money? Because I read about you guys being forced to go out and beg on the streets.
Well, there were two ways that were used to make money and to survive. One of them was not people working and having jobs. That would involve too much interaction with the outside world. So the children begged. We sang on the streets. We sold religious propaganda for 8 hours a day. And then the other way was that the women of the group were prostitutes in the evening. And that went on for a while until the AIDS scare happened and until we started rebelling and they started trying to change some of the rules and fit better into society.
But you had to become like little actors.
Absolutely. We had to smile nonstop. You could not have a bad day. If you were frowning, if you did not appear to be constantly happy, both inside the commune and out, we rehearsed smiling. We rehearsed what to say if we were asked questions. And it was always, I'm happy, I'm loved, I'm cared for. Now, what people don't know is loved meant we allow you to work, and we show our love by being sexual with you and by disciplining you and by not allowing you to be a child.
Were you surprised? I mean, I know you didn't know Rose McGowan or Joaquin Phoenix, but were you surprised when you learned that they had also been in the Children of God cult?
Not really. It makes a lot of sense to me that former cult members would be good actors and would express themselves that way just because of how much we performed as children. It makes sense that they would do it so well.
Rose's book has got just a heart-wrenching recitation of her time in that group and how she finally got out. And she says that for her father, that the incest was the last straw. That was the point at which he said, "I'm out." But it's amazing that it was allowed to go on for as long as it did. One of the other pieces of this cult was sending the children to what Christina calls prison camps. We'll get to that piece of the story and to her escape right after this break. Welcome back, everyone. So we're speaking with Christina Babin, a mother of 4 now, who spent nearly half of her life in the infamous Children of God cult. We want to tell you that we did reach out to this organization for comment. They said to us in part, although the Family International, that's what they're called now, has apologized for any hurt, real or perceived, that any member or former member may have experienced, we do not give credence to tales of institutionalized abuse told by those who seek to promote their personal agendas or causes or for financial gain. And they say that your account reads like sensationalized fiction because you posted an online account and suggest you're trying to solicit funding for a book and therefore are not to be believed. You want to respond to that?
They said exactly what I thought they would. I really don't need to get into that. There's enough proof out there that I'm not going to waste any time.
Yep.
Go online, look it up.
Check it out. Can we talk about these prison camps? Because I know you were sent all over, Japan, the Philippines. You were in a prison camp, and what does that mean?
So when we, as teenagers, and me personally, wrote that I no longer wanted to have sex with adults, a lot of other people started asking for an education or to leave. They made camps. I was sent with my brother to the Philippines, and I was in a camp. We had walls with barbed wire and glass. We had armed guards from the Filipino military keeping us in. They would publicly beat you if you asked to leave. They would isolate you. They would make you fast for days at a time and then try to break you and get you to confess. And that's, yeah.
How did you put an end to that phase of your time in the cult?
The world actually took notice and started raiding communes around the world. So they shut it down and sent us out. I was sent back to the U.S. To be part of a media home in California to tell the world that we were happy and that we were okay. And but it took me till I was about 21 to actually leave.
Wow. It doesn't seem like you could possibly get out. I mean, like when I hear that you were born into the cult basically at 1, you get to 21. How did you get out?
I met my husband, and he told the leadership that he was bringing me home to visit his parents. I was shocked. We can't do that. And they were so loving and accepting. They didn't know me, but they welcomed me into their home. They had normal dinners where the family sat down together and just showed me that there was something outside that was kind and gentle.
And then you were allowed to just stay out, like leave, and nobody bothered you?
They came around a little bit trying to get us to come back, but once you're 18, they no longer want you because you have to be there of your own free will. So at 18, they no longer try to physically keep you, but the mental chains are very difficult to break after that point.
Right, your whole life you've been brainwashed. So how do you break free of that? And what have the next, because how old are you now?
I'm 44.
Okay, so how did you spend those 23 years becoming the person we now see?
Living in the now, embracing freedom, embracing happiness, becoming the opposite of what they are and what they were. Having a support system.
Did you get some therapy?
Yes.
Yes, amen to therapy. And
a lot.
Do you have any fear about them now?
I do. I have empathy for the adults who were stuck in it and who haven't broken the chains. However, the leadership, Karen Zerbe.
She's the wife. David died, but she was his wife.
Sarah Kelly, who was responsible for me being held against my will in the Philippines. Those people need to be brought to justice. They need to be arrested.
Have you reached out to the FBI?
Yes, we have on multiple occasions.
You have reached out to the
Yes.
FBI.
And like I said
do you believe they
earlier,
have an investigation?
they have lots of files. They told us because the statute of limitations is over and because these crimes were committed in other countries, that they can't reach that far. And I disagree, and I say that if we do have laws that are stopping them from pursuing this, then maybe we need to look at those laws.
Last question. We mentioned in the intro you have 4 children now.
Yes.
You're supporting yourself as an artist.
I'm a full-time artist.
How are you now?
I am fantastic. Art has been a great therapy for me, engaging in it. Being a mother has been amazing. It has reversed so much.
That just represents the tip of the iceberg in terms of the damage David Berg has done during his reign as a human monster first class. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.